Did you ever imagine a single morning could change the course of a royal life forever? Well, for Prince Harry, that morning came faster than anyone expected. The news arrived like a thunderclap, shaking not just him but the entire palace, the media, and the public. By 7 a.m., whispers in Kensington had turned into outright panic. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The House of Lords, in a move that no one saw coming, had stripped him of his duke title. And just like that, the man who had once been a beloved prince, a war hero, and the younger son of a future king was now officially humiliated on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. Imagine receiving a call, perhaps from a trusted aide or a government official, delivering the words, "It's official. You will never be king." Pause for a moment. Let it sink in. The blood drains from your face. Your dreams, your role, your identity within a centuries-old institution, it all collapses in one sentence. This is not a drill. This is not a rumor. This is history being rewritten. And it all happened quietly, behind closed doors, away from cameras, away from the cheering public who once adored him. So how did we get here? How did Prince Harry, who once stood in line for the throne, with all the pomp and privilege that accompanies royal life, suddenly find himself stripped of a title that generations of ancestors had held? The answer is tangled in politics, family tension, and decisions made far from the public eye. It's a story of betrayal, strategy, and a series of events that reveal cracks in the monarchy's polished facade, cracks that no one wants to admit exist. The public might think they know Harry's story. They've followed his marriage to Meghan, his departure from royal duties, his Netflix interviews, his philanthropic endeavors. They've cheered for him, criticized him, and even mocked him. But nothing prepared anyone for this. The House of Lords' decision wasn't just about a title. It was a statement, a bold, unambiguous declaration. Harry is no longer in line for the crown. He will never sit on the throne. And in a world obsessed with royalty, that's the ultimate humiliation. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to step into the halls of the House of Lords themselves. Imagine the wood-paneled rooms, the centuries of tradition, the whispered alliances, the tension in the air as every vote was cast. It wasn't a ceremonial rubber stamp. No, this was a battle fought behind velvet curtains, where every word, every glance, every nod carried meaning. And at the center of it all was Harry, completely unaware of just how far-reaching the consequences would be. Consider the symbolism. The Duke title is not just a fancy label. It carries power, prestige, and a connection to history that traces back generations. Losing it is more than a personal blow. It's public humiliation. It's a declaration that your lineage, your efforts, your identity as part of the monarchy are being questioned. And in Harry's case, it feels almost personal. He didn't just lose a title. He lost a piece of his place in the world, a piece of himself, and perhaps a piece of his family's trust. Now, let's pause and reflect on Meghan's role in this. While Harry was facing the official blow, Meghan, watching from afar, could do nothing. The media captured her expressions in interviews, public appearances, and social media glimpses. You could see it. The mix of shock, disbelief, and fury. It's one thing to lose a title. It's another to watch your partner be publicly stripped, while the world discusses the humiliation as if it were just another headline. What would you do in her place? Fight back? Retreat? Or plan a counterattack that could turn the tables completely? And that's exactly what makes this story more than just royal gossip. This is high-stakes strategy. This is family drama amplified to the level of global spectacle. There are political angles, too. Members of the House of Lords didn't act in a vacuum. Decisions like this reverberate through the corridors of power, shaping public perception, influencing legislation, and potentially affecting the monarchy's future. Every vote, every leaked remark, every offhand comment has been magnified by tabloids and social media into a narrative that Harry cannot escape. The reactions outside the palace walls were instantaneous. Social media erupted. Headlines screamed words like humiliation, fall from grace, and shocking betrayal. Memes flooded timelines, videos dissected every reaction, and opinion polls began tracking public sentiment with unprecedented scrutiny. And while millions commented, shared, and speculated, the real story, the behind-the-scenes truth, remained hidden from view. That's the part most people don't see. The meetings, the strategic discussions, the alliances, the betrayals, the whispered deals that led to this historic decision. It's a world most of us will never glimpse. But we're about to, piece by piece. Because this isn't just about Harry. It's about the monarchy as an institution, about family, loyalty, and the terrifying consequences when tradition meets modern scrutiny. And it's about the shocking choices made by those closest to him. The people who claim to protect the crown, but whose decisions have left a prince exposed, vulnerable, and humiliated in front of the entire world. So what happens next? How will Harry respond? Will he fight back legally, publicly, or privately? Will Meghan's influence sway the narrative, or will it spiral further out of control? And what about Prince William, King Charles, and other royal family members? How are they maneuvering behind the scenes while Harry faces the storm? The answers are tangled in whispers, documents, and private conversations, but one thing is clear. This is just the beginning of a story that will shock you at every turn. What if your entire life changed in the span of a single phone call? That's exactly what happened to Prince Harry the morning the House of Lords delivered their shocking verdict. Imagine being woken up, coffee barely in hand, only to hear the words that would alter everything you thought you knew about your place in the world. It's official. You are stripped of your duke title. You will never be king. Could anything hurt more? The initial reaction was disbelief. Harry stared at the phone, heart pounding, mind racing. How could it be real? The man who had served his country, who had carried the weight of royal expectation with courage and honor, was suddenly being humiliated in a way that seemed almost unimaginable. And yet, it was real. Every member of the House of Lords had voted, their decision irrevocable, their tone cold, their intention unmistakable. The title, the prestige, the symbol of his identity within the monarchy, it was gone. Inside Kensington Palace, the news ricocheted like a bullet through the halls. Staff whispered in corridors, aides exchanged nervous glances, and for a moment, the grandeur of royal tradition seemed fragile, vulnerable, almost human. Harry, usually composed and self-assured, felt the full weight of isolation. The very family who had once celebrated his every milestone now seemed like strangers. William, Charles, and even distant cousins. The reactions ranged from restrained surprise to cold detachment. And as he looked around the palace, the echoes of past privileges suddenly felt hollow. It's one thing to read headlines. It's another to experience history unfolding against you. And the world outside was watching, waiting for the official statement, for Harry's reaction, for any sign of weakness or defiance. Social media accounts exploded within minutes. Memes appeared, some mocking, others sympathetic. Hashtags trended, public opinion polls spiked, and every news outlet had a breaking story. But amidst the chaos, Harry faced an internal battle far more intense than any media scrutiny could ever deliver. The timing of the announcement was strategic. Early morning, before the public had fully stirred, when the palace could control the narrative just enough to shape first impressions. And make no mistake, this was calculated. Every detail, from the wording of the official communiqué to the selection of aides authorized to speak, was part of a deliberate plan to convey not just a political decision, but a personal rebuke. And Harry, despite his instincts and experience, found himself caught off guard. One source close to the palace would later reveal that the decision was the culmination of weeks of closed-door deliberations. Lords debated fiercely, advisors weighed in, and even legal consultants were consulted to ensure the move could withstand scrutiny. No detail was overlooked. Every argument, every precedent, every potential backlash was examined. And in the end, the vote was unanimous. Harry would lose the Duke title, and with it, a symbolic path to the throne. But what made it so devastating wasn't just the official act, it was the betrayal. Not all of it political, not all of it procedural. Some of it was personal. People Harry trusted, people who had promised loyalty, had quietly sided with the decision. The whispers in the corridors of power weren't just about titles. They were about Harry himself, about his choices, his decisions, his marriage, and his willingness to step outside the traditional royal mold. And in that quiet, calculated decision, the message was unmistakable. You are no longer one of us, not fully, not in the way that counts. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle, miles away from the palace, received fragments of the news through aides, friends, and media leaks. Her reaction was a mix of shock, outrage, and determination. Unlike Harry, she had to process it from a distance, relying on second-hand accounts and the occasional message from a worried aide. Could she intervene? Could she strategize? Could she protect him from this unprecedented humiliation? Or was she destined to watch as the institution she married into publicly humiliated her partner? The palace itself became a stage for tension. Guards patrolled with heightened awareness. Staff members carried out their duties with hushed tones, conscious that the public would soon know everything. And within the walls, every conversation became loaded with meaning. Who supported Harry? Who remained loyal? Who had quietly agreed with the Lord's decision? Each glance, each pause, each phrase took on significance, building a network of suspense that would dominate the next several weeks. And the House of Lords had not just removed a title, they had sent a message to the world. To the British public, to the monarchy, to the media, the institution will act decisively to preserve its traditions, even if it means humiliating one of its own. This wasn't a minor reprimand. It wasn't a quiet reshuffling. It was a public declaration that Harry, despite his lineage, despite his service, despite his contributions, was no longer fully embraced by the institution he had been born into. As the news spread, experts weighed in, each analysis more dramatic than the last. Royal historians dissected every precedent, every historical comparison, every nuance in the Lord's official statement. Political commentators speculated on the motives behind the decision. Tabloid journalists sought out every possible source, eager for a quote, a leak, a scandalous revelation. And social media users fueled the frenzy with speculation, outrage, memes, and debates that reached across continents. But Harry's private world was far from the headlines. The emotional weight of the decision pressed on him like a physical burden. Nights became restless, moments of reflection turned into private battles. Every memory of childhood, of duty, of service, now collided with the realization that his title, and the public recognition that came with it, was gone. He was suddenly a prince without a crown, a public figure stripped of a symbol that defined him in the eyes of the world. Yet, even amidst this despair, Harry's mind raced for solutions. Legal avenues, PR strategies, private negotiations, each idea a possible escape, a way to reclaim dignity or fight back. Could he challenge the decision? Could he appeal to public sentiment? Could Meghan, trusted advisors, or even members of the royal family intervene? Every path seemed fraught with risk. Every move could either restore him or make the humiliation deeper, more public, more permanent. And then there was William. Prince William's reaction was calm, calculated, almost unreadable. But insiders claim the tension between the brothers reached new heights that morning. Private conversations, subtle gestures, and brief meetings hinted at a rift that was widening, fueled not only by rivalry, but by conflicting visions of duty, loyalty, and the monarchy itself. How could one family reconcile personal bonds with the expectations of centuries-old tradition? That question loomed over the palace like a storm cloud. In the midst of all this, the media coverage was relentless. Headlines screamed with phrases designed to shock. Humiliation for Harry, Duke stripped, royal fallout. Images of Harry, sometimes juxtaposed with Meghan, circulated endlessly, each one analyzed, captioned, and dissected. The public consumed it voraciously, yet behind every headline, every meme, every viral post, there were unseen consequences. Every statement, every reaction, every tweet carried weight that could influence public perception and Harry's personal trajectory for years to come. As the day progressed, aides scrambled to manage communications, issuing statements carefully worded to avoid further inflaming the situation. But leaks emerged, some intentional, others accidental. Rumors swirled about the vote, the lobbying, the personal motives. And as more people learned the truth behind the decision, the palace realized the story had taken on a life of its own, far beyond their control. But what made this moment truly unforgettable wasn't just the title being stripped. It was the ripple effect, the tension between Harry and William, the media frenzy, Meghan's distant involvement, the calculated political moves, the private anguish, and the public spectacle. Every element combined into a storm that would dominate headlines for weeks, months, and perhaps years. And for Harry, it was clear nothing would ever be the same. The world watched. The palace held its breath. And somewhere deep in the corridors of power, the lords who had cast their votes knew the impact of their decision. They had made history. They had humiliated a prince. They had shifted the balance of the monarchy. And as the day drew to a close, one question remained. How would Harry respond? How would Meghan act? And what would happen next that could either salvage his dignity or seal his public humiliation forever? What if the most consequential decisions about a prince's life were made in a room you would never see? That's exactly what happened in the days leading up to Harry's official humiliation. Behind the heavy oak doors of the House of Lords, away from cameras and public scrutiny, a series of secret meetings took place that would seal Harry's fate. And the details of these clandestine discussions reveal not just political strategy, but a level of personal betrayal that few could have imagined. Picture it. Velvet curtains drawn, dim lighting, the faint scent of polished wood mingling with anticipation. Lords, advisors, and senior palace officials sat around long tables, their expressions a mix of gravitas and calculation. Every word spoken mattered. Every nod, every pause, every glance across the room carried meaning. This was no ordinary debate. This was history in motion, with a young prince's future hanging in the balance. According to insiders, the meetings were intense from the start. Some members argued against removing Harry's title, citing tradition, family honor, and the potential backlash from both the public and the media. Others pushed for decisive action, claiming that Harry's choices, his departure from official duties, his public interviews, and his perceived alignment with external influences had undermined his credibility and position. Arguments were sharp, voices sometimes rising, yet all participants were acutely aware of the stakes. It's important to understand the unusual alliances that formed in these rooms. Not all lords were aligned along conventional political lines. Some had personal connections to Charles, William, or even Harry himself. Some saw this as an opportunity to reinforce the monarchy's authority. Others were motivated by private grudges or ambition, seizing a moment to assert influence over a historically rigid institution. And amidst these conflicting interests, a consensus slowly emerged. Harry must be stripped of his duke title. The process was meticulous. Drafts of official statements were debated line by line. Legal advisors scrutinized language for loopholes, potential challenges, and historical precedent. Even the order of announcements was discussed, down to the hour and minute, to maximize impact and control narrative. In essence, Harry's fate was being scripted with the precision of a political thriller, each detail orchestrated to ensure the humiliation would be both absolute and irreversible. What made it particularly striking was the level of personal insight involved. Members of the House of Lords reportedly discussed Harry's temperament, his recent public statements, and even private actions, assessing not just his legal standing but his emotional response. They studied him like a chess piece, predicting moves, vulnerabilities, and reactions. And according to sources, there was one figure in particular whose influence was pivotal, someone Harry considered an ally, but who quietly sided with the decision. The betrayal, when it became known, would shock the palace. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's absence from these rooms was conspicuous. While advisors debated, she was left in the dark, receiving only fragments of information. Her frustration and helplessness reportedly grew as leaks trickled in, some accidental, some deliberate. The meetings were designed to minimize her influence, to prevent any opportunity to counter the decision before it became public. And yet, Meghan's strategic instincts began to kick in, even from afar. Calls were made, messages sent, loyal allies were rallied, all in an effort to protect Harry from the full force of the impending storm. During these secret sessions, every detail about the royal protocol was scrutinized. Some lords argued that Harry had overstepped boundaries by publicly discussing family matters, thereby violating centuries-old conventions. Others countered that the monarchy's image was paramount, that a public reprimand, though painful, was necessary to preserve credibility. The tension was palpable. Every argument carried weight, every vote a potential turning point. And in the end, the decision was not just political. it was deeply personal. The implications extended beyond the walls of the palace and the House of Lords. Advisors debated the potential fallout: media coverage, public opinion, international attention. One insider described it as calculating the tsunami before it hits the shore. Every scenario was considered, from backlash to viral headlines, and contingency plans were drafted. But even with all the preparation, there was no way to fully anticipate the emotional and public impact of stripping a prince of his title. What is remarkable, and rarely discussed publicly, is the psychological intensity of these meetings. Reports suggest that some participants were visibly shaken by the gravity of the decision. Others were exhilarated, sensing an opportunity to reinforce authority or settle personal scores. And Harry, of course, was entirely unaware. While these deliberations shaped the course of his life, he continued with his daily routine, oblivious to the storm building just beyond the palace walls. There were moments during the meetings when personal grievances surfaced. Some lords reportedly criticized Harry for past choices, his media appearances, his lifestyle, his alignment with external influences. Others questioned Meghan's role, suggesting that her presence and public statements complicated matters and necessitated decisive action. These discussions reveal the intricate web of personal and institutional considerations that intersected to create a moment of historic significance. And then there were the leaks. Despite the careful planning, fragments of information began to reach the press. Anonymous sources hinted at tension, strategic maneuvering, and impending decisions. The palace, aware of the leaks, intensified security and tightened communication protocols. But each leak added fuel to the fire, escalating public curiosity and anticipation. The world was starting to sense that something monumental was about to happen, though no one knew the full extent. Throughout all of this, Harry's closest advisors were reportedly divided. Some urged immediate action to defend the title, to counter any negative narrative. Others cautioned patience, warning that any public pushback could worsen the situation. The internal debate mirrored the broader secret discussions, illustrating how even those closest to Harry were uncertain, conflicted, and navigating a treacherous landscape. One of the most astonishing revelations from these meetings was the degree of premeditation. Sources claim that the idea to strip Harry of his duke title had been considered long before the public announcement. It was not a spur-of-the-moment decision, nor a reaction to a single event. Instead, it was the culmination of months of careful observation, strategic planning, and coalition building among key figures within the lords and the palace. Every angle had been weighed, every potential repercussion analyzed, and every word in the official statement vetted multiple times. The human element cannot be overstated. These were not abstract discussions. They involved people with emotions, ambitions, fears, and biases. Some lords reportedly experienced guilt after casting their votes. Others felt vindicated. And amidst it all, Harry, once the focus of affection, expectation, and admiration, remained unaware that the institution he was born into was preparing to publicly humiliate him in a manner both historic and deeply personal. As the meetings concluded, the final drafts of the announcement were circulated, each word sharpened for maximum impact. Advisors rehearsed statements, communications teams prepared press releases, and security personnel ensured that no detail would leak prematurely. And while the world remained oblivious, the palace, the House of Lords, and a handful of trusted insiders knew that the storm was imminent. The countdown had begun. But what made these secret meetings most shocking wasn't just the procedural rigor or the strategic foresight. It was the level of personal betrayal embedded in every decision. Allies of Harry, people he trusted implicitly, had participated in discussions that ultimately determined his humiliation. Conversations he thought private had been dissected, analyzed, and weaponized. And when the decision became public, the full magnitude of that betrayal would leave him reeling, questioning not just his role in the monarchy, but the loyalty of those around him. And in the midst of all this, Meghan's determination grew. Though physically absent from the rooms where history was being made, she began orchestrating her own counter-strategies. Calls to legal advisors, private discussions with trusted media contacts, and efforts to rally sympathetic voices in the palace and beyond became a parallel battle. The question was no longer simply about a title. It was about control, narrative, and who would dictate the story of Harry's future. By the time the official announcement was ready, the secret meetings had already done their work. The narrative was carefully constructed to convey authority, precision, and inevitability. Harry's humiliation was no longer a possibility. It was a foregone conclusion. And yet, even as the announcement prepared to go public, the world remained unaware of the intricate, tense, and often emotional maneuvering that had taken place behind closed doors. What happens when family loyalty clashes with ambition, tradition, and public expectation? For Prince Harry and Prince William, that question became painfully real in the aftermath of the House of Lords' historic decision. A sibling rivalry that had long simmered beneath the polished surface of royal appearances suddenly erupted into a public spectacle, revealing tensions that had been kept private for decades. The morning Harry learned that he had been stripped of his duke title, William was already awake, strategizing. Sources close to Kensington Palace suggest that he had been briefed beforehand, consulted in secret by advisors, and even subtly influenced the planning of the announcement. From William's perspective, the decision was not just about protocol. It was about protecting the monarchy, preserving public trust, and, in his mind, preventing what he saw as a repeat of past mistakes. Yet the optics of his involvement, though carefully managed, would paint a picture of fraternal betrayal. Imagine the scenario: two brothers, raised side by side, taught to carry the weight of history and expectation, now standing on opposite sides of a personal and political chasm. For years, William had been groomed as the future king, expected to embody the monarchy's traditions, uphold its protocols, and maintain its image. Harry, meanwhile, was cast as the adventurous younger son, charismatic, independent, sometimes unpredictable. Their paths were always going to diverge, but few could have predicted the magnitude of the fallout now looming. Sources reveal that William's demeanor during the period leading up to the announcement was measured, even calculated. He was careful not to appear overly triumphant, yet his presence in private meetings and strategic discussions was unmistakable. Advisors claim that his influence was pivotal in shaping the narrative of inevitability, that Harry's removal of his duke title was not a punishment, but a necessary step for the preservation of the monarchy. But from Harry's perspective, this was personal. The brother who had once been his closest ally, his confidant, and his protector now appeared to be complicit in his public humiliation. The emotional weight of this sibling showdown cannot be overstated. Royal observers describe it as a collision of loyalty, pride, and deep-seated expectations. William, in his role as future king, had to balance compassion for his brother with the demands of duty. Harry, meanwhile, was caught in a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and betrayal. How could someone who shared his childhood, his secrets, and his upbringing participate, directly or indirectly, in an act that stripped him of honor and dignity? The tension was palpable during private family interactions. Informal reports suggest that conversations between the brothers were curt, loaded with subtext, and occasionally explosive. Advisors describe moments where Harry's frustration boiled over, leading to terse exchanges with William that left both men shaken. The palace, always a place of decorum and measured gestures, became an arena for unspoken conflict, where every glance, every pause, and every comment carried meaning far beyond what was spoken aloud. Public appearances only added to the strain. In a few weeks' time, Harry and William were required to appear together at events designed to maintain the facade of unity. Yet body language experts and royal commentators noted the subtle but unmistakable signals of tension. Stiff postures, fleeting glances of irritation, and smiles that never reached the eyes. The public, oblivious to the underlying dynamics, saw only a veneer of decorum, unaware of the storm raging beneath the surface. One insider account paints a vivid picture of a particular encounter at Kensington Palace. Harry, still reeling from the announcement, confronted William in private. The conversation, according to sources, was both tense and emotionally charged. He couldn't believe it, one advisor said. He felt betrayed. William, on the other hand, tried to explain it as a necessary action for the institution. But Harry heard betrayal, not reason. Words flew, voices raised, emotions raw. The fraternal bond that had seemed unbreakable was now strained to the breaking point. Yet, despite the personal conflict, there was also a strategic dimension. William, acutely aware of public perception, knew that any overt confrontation could be disastrous. Royal protocol dictated a measured response: maintain appearances, control leaks, and ensure that the narrative remained favorable to the monarchy. But controlling emotions, especially in a family torn apart by secrecy and power, proved far more difficult than managing headlines. And then there was the media. Rumors of sibling tension quickly leaked, magnified by journalists eager to turn speculation into headline news. Every movement, every statement, every public appearance became fodder for analysis. Were the brothers reconciled? Were they plotting against each other? The world wanted drama, and the palace, despite its attempts at discretion, could not contain it. Public curiosity became a pressure cooker, intensifying the private conflict and forcing both Harry and William to navigate a treacherous landscape where family, duty, and reputation collided. Harry's emotional state during this period was complex. He reportedly oscillated between anger, disbelief, and reflection. On one hand, he was furious at what he perceived as betrayal by his own family. On the other, he understood the stakes: the monarchy's preservation, the public's expectations, and the broader implications for his children and his legacy. Every decision he contemplated was layered with both personal emotion and strategic calculation. Could he confront William publicly? Would that only deepen the rift? Or should he focus on rebuilding his own path, independent of the family he once trusted implicitly? Meanwhile, William's internal struggle was no less intense. He faced the burden of expectation not just as a brother, but as a future king. Publicly, he had to appear composed, loyal, and responsible. Privately, he grappled with guilt, doubt, and the knowledge that his actions, or inactions, would shape not just Harry's fate, but the monarchy's image in the eyes of the world. Advisors noted that William spent long hours in consultation, weighing every potential outcome, considering both the short-term fallout and the long-term implications for family unity and public perception. And then there was the element of surprise. According to leaks, Harry had no idea that William had been involved, directly or indirectly, in the preparations that led to the stripping of his title. Discovering this would only intensify feelings of betrayal and humiliation. From Harry's perspective, the family that once shared his childhood, his laughter, and his secrets had now become a source of immense personal and public pain. The very person he had once relied upon for guidance, support, and protection was now entangled in a narrative that undermined his dignity and agency. Adding fuel to the fire were the subtle, often imperceptible moves in the public arena. William's statements, carefully worded and strategically timed, were interpreted by Harry as veiled justifications for the Lord's decision. Even benign comments about duty, tradition, and loyalty carried undertones that could be construed as criticism. And while the public might have seen only politeness or diplomacy, the brothers felt every word, every pause, and every gesture with the intensity of a private battlefield. The clash between Harry and William was more than personal. It was emblematic. It reflected the tension between tradition and modernity, duty and individuality, public expectation and private desire. Harry, increasingly independent and outspoken, represented a challenge to centuries of convention. William, deeply rooted in protocol and the monarchy's image, embodied the preservation of legacy. Their conflict, therefore, was not just sibling rivalry. It was a collision of competing visions for the future of the royal family itself. And as the weeks progressed, the tension only escalated. Advisors began to notice patterns in behavior: sudden silences, unplanned confrontations, strategic maneuvering in public appearances. Every move by one brother prompted a reaction from the other. Every statement, every glance, every headline became part of an ongoing chess game, where the stakes were not only titles and privileges but trust, loyalty, and the perception of an entire nation. Some insiders suggest that the rift might never fully heal. The combination of public humiliation, secret planning, and perceived betrayal created a fracture in the sibling relationship that could endure for years. Even attempts at reconciliation, carefully orchestrated by advisors, were often superficial, failing to address the deeper emotional wounds. The brothers, once inseparable, now navigated a complex landscape where every interaction was filtered through layers of tension, expectation, and caution. And yet, amidst all the conflict, there remained an unspoken understanding. The monarchy itself depended on appearances, cohesion, and public perception. Both Harry and William knew that, despite their personal grievances, the eyes of the world were upon them. Any overt confrontation could trigger a media frenzy, a public relations disaster, or even political repercussions. They were bound by duty, protocol, and the inescapable reality of their roles, even as their personal relationship frayed. But what made the situation even more precarious was the involvement of Meghan. Her strategic insight, media savvy, and unwavering loyalty to Harry meant that any move William made would be countered, subtly and powerfully, by her influence from the outside. The brothers' showdown was no longer just a private family matter. It had become a high-stakes battle involving advisors, media, and public opinion, each layer adding complexity and intensity to an already volatile situation. And just when it seemed that tensions had reached their peak, an unexpected leak revealed private communications between William and key members of the House of Lords, confirming what Harry had long feared. The decisions that had humiliated him were, in part, facilitated by the very person he once trusted most. The revelation sent shockwaves through the palace, raising questions about loyalty, power, and the fragile bonds of family. What would you do if the world watched while your partner was publicly humiliated, and there was nothing you could do to stop it? For Meghan Markle, that question became painfully real the morning the House of Lords officially stripped Harry of his Duke title. From across the ocean, far from the ornate halls of Kensington Palace, she learned in fragments, whispers, and leaks that her husband, the man she loved, the father of her children, was being publicly disgraced. And her reaction, though unseen by the world at first, was a complex storm of shock, fury, and strategic determination. Imagine the moment. Meghan sitting in a quiet room, the news flashing across her phone, emails, and messages from trusted aides. The words barely seemed real. Stripped of his Duke title. Will never be king. Each phrase hitting like a physical blow. The emotions were immediate and raw. Anger, disbelief, heartbreak, and fear all collided at once. What could she do? How could she intervene from a distance, when decisions that affected Harry's life had been made in secret, without consultation, and with some of his closest family complicit? Sources close to Meghan reveal that her initial response was a mixture of silence and controlled rage. She reportedly paced her residence, making calls to close allies, advisors, and media contacts, attempting to piece together the truth. Who had been involved? How had the decision come about? Why had Harry not been warned? Every question burned with urgency. Every answer only added more layers of frustration. And while the public might have imagined Meghan as calm or composed, the reality was a woman grappling with shock, while simultaneously strategizing her next move. The first challenge she faced was timing. The House of Lords announcement had been meticulously scheduled for maximum impact, designed to catch Harry, and by extension, Meghan, off guard. She had no opportunity to prepare or to mitigate the damage beforehand. Every statement she considered, every call she made, had to be precise. Any misstep could escalate the humiliation, fuel media speculation, or inadvertently give the Lord's decision more weight. In a sense, she was forced to fight a battle in the dark, with limited information and extremely high stakes. Emotionally, the blow was devastating. Meghan reportedly felt a profound sense of injustice. Harry, her partner, had served his country, upheld royal duties, and endured public scrutiny for years. Yet, he was being punished, not for criminal misdeeds, not for betrayal, but for decisions that challenged tradition and authority. For Meghan, it was a reminder that power within the monarchy is not just about titles. It is about control, narrative, and influence. And in this battle, she suddenly realized she was facing opponents who would stop at nothing to assert dominance. The reports of her reactions described tears and fury in equal measure. There were moments when she reportedly broke down, privately mourning the loss of dignity and the public humiliation of the man she loved. Yet there were also moments of sharp, controlled anger, where she focused entirely on strategy, plotting ways to regain influence and protect Harry from further attacks. The duality of her response, emotional vulnerability paired with calculated determination, illustrates the complexity of her role, not just as a spouse, but as a public figure navigating an institution designed to limit her power. Meanwhile, Meghan's legal and media advisors were mobilized. Calls to lawyers began almost immediately, exploring potential avenues to challenge the title stripping. Could there be a legal argument? Could public opinion be leveraged? Could the narrative be reframed to protect Harry's reputation? Each question was a potential weapon, a tool to mitigate what was already an unprecedented humiliation. Yet, as insiders reveal, every plan had to be balanced with caution. The monarchy, after all, operates on tradition, precedent, and public perception. Any overt confrontation could backfire, intensifying scrutiny or escalating tensions with William, Charles, and the lords themselves. In parallel, Meghan began coordinating with sympathetic insiders within the palace and the media. Leaks, carefully timed statements, and selective disclosures became part of a broader strategy to counteract the humiliation. Sources suggest that she identified allies willing to speak in her favor, individuals capable of subtly shifting public sentiment or framing the story in a way that highlighted injustice rather than scandal. Every move was calculated, every action designed to protect Harry and their children while exposing the unfairness of the Lord's decision. Yet the emotional stakes were deeply personal. Meghan was acutely aware that this wasn't just a political maneuver. It was an attack on family, identity, and legacy. Harry's place in the monarchy had been publicly diminished, and by extension, the position of their children had also been called into question. The stakes were generational. What happened now would reverberate not just through Harry's life, but through the upbringing, security, and future of Archie and Lilibet. The weight of responsibility pressed on Meghan in a way few could understand. Her fury was not only directed outward. There was an internal component as well, a simmering anger at the institution itself. Meghan reportedly viewed the monarchy as an organization that historically resisted change, resisted diversity, and resisted voices that challenged its traditional narrative. Harry's punishment, in her eyes, was symbolic of a broader systemic rigidity, a reminder that breaking from tradition comes at a steep personal cost. And she understood, perhaps more acutely than anyone, that the cost would continue to escalate unless carefully managed. The media, meanwhile, amplified the tension. Headlines speculated about Meghan's reaction, often exaggerating or misrepresenting her emotions. Some outlets framed her as vengeful, others as distant, all while failing to capture the nuance of her strategic decision-making. Every article, every opinion piece, every viral tweet created additional pressure, forcing Meghan to balance her personal grief with the demands of public perception. She was navigating not only the humiliation of her husband, but also the narrative that the world would ultimately accept as truth. Amid this storm, Meghan reportedly reached out to close friends, influential allies, and media contacts, carefully curating the information she shared. Nothing was left to chance. Every conversation, every disclosure was timed to maximize impact, mitigate risk, and preserve Harry's dignity. It was a counteroffensive that required precision, patience, and a keen understanding of both human nature and the machinery of power. Yet, even as she acted strategically, Meghan's personal anguish was palpable. Friends described moments of silent reflection, where she allowed herself to process the shock and betrayal, moments of tears mingled with resolve. These private emotions, however, never leaked publicly, highlighting her ability to maintain composure even under immense pressure. It was a blend of vulnerability and strength that few outsiders could truly comprehend. Perhaps most importantly, Meghan's reaction set the stage for a broader conflict that extended beyond Harry and William. Her involvement introduced an unpredictable element into an already volatile situation. No one could fully anticipate how her actions, strategic or emotional, would influence the monarchy, the media, or public perception. The stakes were no longer confined to family dynamics. They encompassed the legacy, reputation, and future of the institution itself. Insiders suggest that Meghan's calculated fury would soon begin to bear fruit. Leaks strategically released to sympathetic journalists highlighted the injustice of Harry's punishment. Public sympathy started to build. Questions arose in Parliament. Discussions in social circles and among media commentators increasingly centered on fairness, equality, and tradition. The story was no longer just about a title. It was about power, loyalty, and the right to autonomy within an institution built on centuries of precedent. And yet, for all her planning and strategy, Meghan's actions were not without risk. Any overt move, any misstep in communication, could provoke retaliation, deepen family rifts, or exacerbate public scrutiny. The delicate balance between protecting Harry and maintaining her own influence required constant vigilance, foresight, and emotional resilience. Every decision was a high-stakes gamble, with consequences that could reverberate for years. By the end of that first week, Meghan had established herself as a central figure in the unfolding drama. Her reaction, part emotional, part strategic, demonstrated not only her loyalty to Harry, but also her ability to navigate a treacherous landscape with intelligence and precision. Friends and advisors observed her transformation, from shock to determination, from fury to action. She was no longer a passive observer. She had become an active player in a high-stakes game with real consequences. And yet, despite all her efforts, one truth remained undeniable. The House of Lords' decision had set events in motion that could not be reversed. Harry's humiliation was public, his title gone, and the palace, the media, and the world were now fully invested in the drama. Meghan's interventions could mitigate the damage, but they could not erase the impact. The question that lingered was how far she was willing to go, what risks she would take, and whether her actions could truly alter the course of history that had already begun to unfold. What happens when centuries of tradition collide with a single, explosive decision? That is exactly what occurred inside the House of Lords the morning the vote to strip Prince Harry of his Duke title was finalized. Far from the media frenzy, away from public scrutiny, the Lords convened in their ancient chambers, weighing history, protocol, and personal judgment before rendering a verdict that would shock not just the royal family, but the nation and the world. Imagine walking into the chamber, the grandeur of the room almost oppressive, red leather chairs lined in rows, polished wood stretching for meters, portraits of former lords staring down with unyielding authority. Every corner of the room whispered history. Every wall carried centuries of precedent. And yet on this day, history itself was about to bend in a way few could have predicted. The air was thick with tension, the kind that only comes from understanding the magnitude of a decision that would ripple far beyond these walls. Reports from insiders suggest that the debate was fierce. Some lords, steeped in tradition, argued that removing Harry's title would be a violation of custom and could set a dangerous precedent. Others contended that the monarchy needed to assert control, that Harry's recent choices, his media appearances, his break from royal duties, and his outspoken public statements left no alternative. Voices rose and fell, occasionally colliding, each speaker acutely aware of the eyes of history. The irony was palpable. The very institution tasked with preserving royal tradition was actively reshaping it in real time. What had once been considered unthinkable, stripping a duke of his title while alive, while in the line of succession, was now being debated with precision, passion, and, according to some, a degree of personal satisfaction. For some members, this was more than a procedural necessity. It was a moral or political victory, a way to assert authority over a figure who had increasingly challenged the established order. Observers describe moments when personal feelings seeped into the deliberations. Some lords reportedly referenced Harry's marriage to Meghan Markle, framing it as a disruption to tradition. Others questioned Harry's loyalty, his judgment, even his temperament. The debate was not merely legal or procedural. It was deeply human, laden with judgments, assumptions, and biases that turned an institutional decision into a personal one. Each word carried weight. Each glance across the table hinted at alliances, rivalries, and covert agreements that were as old as the house itself. And then there were the unexpected voices, those who challenged the majority, who argued passionately that the vote would be seen as vindictive, unfair, or unnecessary. They pointed out the risks: public backlash, media scrutiny, and the possibility that the move could inadvertently elevate Harry's profile as a sympathetic figure. Some warned that the decision could ignite social debates about fairness, equality, and the relevance of monarchy in a modern world. But these dissenting voices were ultimately overruled. The tide had turned, and the majority voted decisively in favor of stripping Harry of his title. What made the process even more dramatic were the leaks. Despite strict confidentiality, details of the debate began to trickle to journalists, creating a sense of anticipation and suspense among the public. Reports hinted at sharp exchanges, secret alliances, and heated disagreements. Everything that would make the announcement inevitable feel like a public spectacle even before it was officially delivered. The palace, aware of the leaks, scrambled to manage the narrative, but the momentum was already unstoppable. The procedural mechanics were meticulous. Each lord's vote was carefully recorded, documented, and verified to ensure legitimacy. The exact wording of the announcement was debated repeatedly, each phrase weighed for legal accuracy and public impact. Even the timing of delivery was scrutinized, down to the minute, designed to maximize visibility while controlling perception. The goal was clear. The decision had to appear authoritative, inevitable, and justified, leaving little room for dispute or reinterpretation. The emotional intensity within the chamber was extraordinary. Some lords reportedly felt the weight of history pressing down on them, aware that their votes would become part of the historical record. Others were exhilarated, sensing the opportunity to reinforce royal authority or settle personal disagreements. And lurking beneath it all was the awareness that their decision would not only affect Harry's life, but would also send shockwaves through public opinion, the media, and the monarchy itself. The decision, once finalized, set off a chain reaction. A carefully orchestrated statement was drafted, approved, and scheduled for immediate release. Every word was crafted to convey authority, every detail aimed at minimizing dissent. But even with meticulous planning, the public reaction exceeded expectations. Within minutes, headlines erupted across newspapers, television, and online platforms. Social media exploded, amplifying both outrage and support, with millions engaging in debates, sharing speculation, and dissecting every nuance of the announcement. The shockwaves were immediate and widespread. Commentators, historians, and political analysts weighed in, framing the vote as a historic and unprecedented move. Some praised it as a necessary measure to protect the monarchy. Others condemned it as harsh, unnecessary, or even cruel. Across the UK, conversations in cafes, offices, and homes revolved around Harry's fate, the morality of the Lord's decision, and the implications for the monarchy's future. And the ripple extended internationally, with news outlets around the world dissecting the events in detail, ensuring that Harry's humiliation was not confined to Britain alone. Meanwhile, within the palace, the aftermath of the vote was already being felt. Staff and advisors scrambled to anticipate the consequences, managing public appearances, preparing statements, and counseling family members. The emotional strain on Harry, Meghan, and even the broader family was immense. Sources suggest that private conversations were tense, strategic discussions frequent, and the atmosphere charged with anticipation and anxiety. The palace, accustomed to handling delicate matters discreetly, was now grappling with a crisis of both public perception and personal relationships. What is remarkable about this episode is how personal the vote had become. While ostensibly about titles and protocol, the discussions inside the House of Lords revealed a deep entanglement of emotion, judgment, and opinion. Harry's actions, perceived defiance, and public persona were dissected, analyzed, and used as justification for a decision that went far beyond mere procedure. For many observers, it was clear that the vote had become as much about personal feelings toward Harry as it had about the monarchy's structure or legal precedent. The public fallout was instantaneous. Social media exploded with speculation, outrage, and support. Memes appeared, commentary spread, and debates erupted online, each narrative competing for attention. The announcement dominated headlines for days, drawing scrutiny from political analysts, historians, and celebrity commentators alike. And while the media frenzy raged, Harry and Meghan were forced to process the consequences, weighing personal, familial, and public implications in real time. From a strategic standpoint, the decision by the House of Lords was a masterclass in controlling narrative while exercising power. By stripping Harry of his Duke title in a deliberate, public, and seemingly impartial manner, they sent a message: tradition, authority, and protocol supersede individual ambition, celebrity, and even familial bonds. But the cost was high, not only for Harry but for the monarchy itself. Critics warned that the move could exacerbate familial tensions, spark public sympathy for Harry, and fuel ongoing debates about fairness, equality, and the role of the monarchy in the modern age. Inside the walls of the palace, advisors reportedly debated the timing of Harry's next public appearance, the wording of potential responses, and the management of Meghan's involvement. The ripple effects of the Lords' vote were not confined to legal or ceremonial matters. They permeated every corner of the monarchy, influencing decisions, interactions, and even public perception. Every move had to be calculated, carefully orchestrated, and timed with precision to prevent further embarrassment or unintended consequences. And while the House of Lords had formally acted, the human consequences were only beginning to unfold. Harry's sense of identity, his public persona, and his family relationships were all in jeopardy. Meghan's determination to counteract the humiliation introduced a new dynamic into the situation, creating a volatile environment where every statement, every appearance, and every decision became a potential flashpoint. The personal, political, and public dimensions were now fully intertwined, leaving no room for error, misjudgment, or miscommunication. What happens when the world discovers that a prince has been publicly humiliated, and every detail is dissected, shared, and debated across millions of screens? That is exactly what unfolded in the hours following the House of Lords' announcement that Prince Harry had been stripped of his Duke title. Social media erupted like a digital wildfire, with reactions pouring in from every corner of the globe. And in this modern age, where perception is often as powerful as reality, the storm was immediate, unrelenting, and impossible to control. Almost instantly, hashtags began trending on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Hashtag Prince Harry stripped, hashtag Duke no more, and hashtag royal fallout surged in popularity, drawing millions of users into heated debate. Within minutes, viral posts speculated on the reasons behind the Lords' decision. Some framed it as a necessary move to preserve royal tradition. Others blasted it as an unnecessary humiliation, highlighting Harry's service to the country, his charity work, and his sacrifices as a member of the royal family. The speed and scale of the reactions were unprecedented, and every comment, meme, and share amplified the drama. Memes were particularly brutal and inventive. Some portrayed Harry as a fallen hero, stripped of privilege, wandering the halls of Buckingham with nothing but a titleless identity. Others mocked the situation, exaggerating his perceived arrogance or missteps. Short video clips, GIFs, and social media edits flooded timelines, blending humor, outrage, and shock in ways that created a constant stream of engagement. The internet, relentless in its scrutiny, turned Harry's personal humiliation into a public spectacle, a shared cultural moment dissected in real time. At the same time, opinion threads exploded. Fans and critics debated endlessly. Was this punishment fair? Was it a personal vendetta disguised as a procedural decision? Or was it a necessary step to protect the monarchy's image? Every post became a microcosm of the broader national conversation, and Harry, while aware of the public outcry, had little control over the narrative. Each comment, each shared post, was a reminder that the world was now watching him, judging him, and reacting to a version of reality that was only partially accurate. Even outside the UK, the reaction was global. American media covered the story with relentless intensity. News outlets in Australia, Canada, and Europe dissected the implications, comparing this unprecedented move to historical precedents or monarchic crises in other nations. Social media users worldwide joined in, offering sympathy, ridicule, or outrage. The story transcended borders, turning Harry's personal and familial humiliation into a global spectacle. Celebrities and influencers added their voices to the frenzy. Some publicly expressed support for Harry, emphasizing his service, his humanity, and the unfairness of public shaming. Others made sarcastic comments, capitalizing on the drama to generate likes, shares, and engagement. The mix of support, mockery, and sensationalism created a dizzying digital environment in which every opinion, no matter how extreme, contributed to the larger narrative. Meanwhile, traditional media ramped up coverage as well. Newspapers, television programs, and online publications offered analysis, interviews, and expert commentary. Royal correspondents dissected every angle, the legal implications, the personal fallout, and the historical significance. Television panels debated heatedly whether the monarchy had acted appropriately, while newspapers featured photos of Harry, some candid, some posed, each selected to amplify the narrative of humiliation or sympathy, depending on the publication's stance. Public sentiment, measured through polls and social media engagement, showed clear polarization. Some segments of the population condemned Harry for breaking protocol, questioning whether he had forfeited his right to royal privileges through actions deemed inappropriate or rebellious. Others rallied to his defense, highlighting his charitable work, his sacrifices in military service, and the perceived injustice of being publicly humiliated for choices that challenged tradition. Each reaction added layers of complexity, creating a social media landscape that was as unpredictable as it was intense. The emotional impact on Harry and Meghan was immense. For Harry, the constant visibility of his humiliation was a psychological blow. Every viral meme, every news headline, every social media debate was a reminder of his stripped title, a public reinforcement of the private betrayal he felt. Meghan, already strategizing her countermeasures, had to navigate this relentless wave of public opinion, managing both her own emotions and the narrative surrounding it.